I just clicked on Michael's link because Michael sent me a link to it.
There's when you top right corner.
Get into it because we've got a lot to cover today. So welcome everyone, and for those of you who haven't been to Disruption Circle before, I welcome you. For those of you returning from last year, I welcome you again. Disruption Circle is a program which introduces you to thought leaders. It introduces you to a network of senior HR peers, and the whole objective of the program is to introduce you to that thought leadership and to allow you to develop your professional HR network. So I welcome you all here today. And I particularly welcome our special guests, Michael Herbet and Dave Burrows from Faethm by Pearson, who are our special guests, and they're going to talk to us today about the future of work and how technology, and in particular artificial intelligence, can play a part in that. So I'm going to the format for today will be an overview of Faethm and the Australian labour market that Michael will do, and then Dave's going to talk to us about strategic workforce planning. Dave is most welcome to accept questions throughout his presentation, so please feel free to ask any questions during that. And then at the conclusion of the presentation, we will also have an open discussion for about half an hour, and then I'll wrap it up. Now, just for admin purposes, the meeting will finish at 3:30 our time, so it's going to go for approximately 1.5 hours to allow plenty of discussion and allow you to get your questions to Michael and David and myself if you can. Please feel free to use the chat function if you want to send through any specific questions, and we look forward to a really interesting and entertaining session today. So by way of introduction, in the last 12 months we've had 2 clients who've had a significant need to plan for the future of the needs of the people within their organisation because of major change events. The easiest solution for us would have been to deliver our traditional change management process involving consultants and workshops, but we are all limited in terms of only knowing what every person in the room currently knows based on their collective experiences. I decided that wasn't good enough for our clients, and we went in search of a better solution utilising our strengths, which are people, career development, and people in organisations managing change, and combining that with some form of tool which would allow us to look into the future and better understand the possibilities for people in organisations. This is where we came across Faethm. Faethm have created an artificial intelligence platform specifically designed to use machine and deep learning AI artificial intelligence to generate predictive insights into the future of work and what it means to organisations and its people. What Faethm brings to the table is a platform which has the capability to use data to make informed views as to the future of work. We at Choice decided this was the solution which had the capacity to deliver an informed view of the future, coupled with our experience to deliver a more complete solution for our clients. This AI platform creates some powerful insights using extensive data to allow organisations to unlock the future of work and begin to practically plan for its impact on the organisation and its workforce. And that's what we want to share with you today. Today we have as our special guests Michael Herbet, who's the Enterprise Account Executive at Faethm, and Dave Burrows, who's the Director of Workforce Planning at Faethm. In Michael, we have a person with extensive experience in the technology and HR industries. He's been an invaluable resource to us at Choice in terms of helping us understand the Faethm platform and how our clients can use it to unlock the world of the future of work. I've subsequently discovered that Michael's a former professional goalkeeper with Paris Saint-Germain and Celtic. So for us, he represents a safe pair of hands. Dave is an information expert and uses his knowledge of data analytics to turn data into information which can be readily used by management for organisational decision making. He's able to see through the data and provide the organisation with the insights that make a difference. We are lucky to have his expertise available to us today. So I'd like you to welcome Michael and Dave, and I'm just going to share my screen so that Michael and Dave can commence their presentation.
Thank you, Damian.
There you go, Michael.
If you can put
Can
up
you see
the,
the screen?
yeah, I can do it. Yeah, I can share it. Let me know when you can see it.
Right, sorry. You can't see it?
Yeah, I'm sharing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is it all there?
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you for the introduction, Damian. Thank you for the opportunity. Welcome, everyone. And as Damian said, we're going to make that session very interactive. So please free to stop us, ask us, question us, discuss any topics you want with us, because we're here to make sure that you got insights from today and a lot of value from today. So as Damian said, I am the Enterprise Account Executive. So I will focus my first part of the pitch on what is Faethm, what we do, how we help organizations and government around the world with their future of work, but also I will share a bit of our insights and research on the future demand of the Australian workforce and what it means for leaders. And then they will focus on the strategic workforce planning and what you need to think about to really get going in your organizations. So Faethm is 5 years old, based in Sydney, Australia. And as Damian mentioned, we were acquired by Pearson 6 months ago. So taking us from a 60 FT large enterprise to a 20,000+ multinational. So a big change. We are now part of the workforce skills division. And the reason we were founded 5 years ago is at the time, a lot of white papers were written about the future of work. The robots were going to take over the world. That was the end of the human being, but really a lack of data and insights to make informed decisions on your workforce and how to prepare your workforce proactively. And as you know, unless you've been living under a rock for the past few years, we have had a lot of disruption in the way of work and where we work, how we work, and the type of work we're doing. And really, a lot of leaders across the globe are trying to tackle how those changes are impacted the workforce. How can we understand the impact of technology on our people? And what type of skills do we currently have, and what are we going to need in the future? And Faethm is now the world leading source for the future of work. And we look at the impact of technology on the workforce, but also macro forces. So from an organization point of view, our clients typically want to understand, our technology that they're investing in is going to impact their workforce. What are the potential career pathways from the people displaced by technology? And what type of curriculum and content can you provide those people to transition them into future roles, either within the organization, if possible, or externally, if we can't keep those people in their roles. And the way we also work with government is what are the impact of macro forces on the future workforce demand of a state or a country or an industry. As an example, we're working with the New South Wales state on the energy transition. Coal mining is in decline, power station is closing down in New South Wales. What does that mean for the workforce? What type of industry can we boost? What type of skills will be required in those industries? How many jobs will be created in local areas? How can we transition people, miners, or other workers displaced by those displacement and retransition them into those jobs in the future? And the way we do it is through a SaaS, software as a service offering. And the way it works, so we spend a lot of time building what is now one of the world's biggest and most robust occupation ontology. We've got 5,600 occupation on the platform that represents 76,000 unique job titles. And the way we approach jobs is what are the skills, attributes specific to that role, but also what are the tasks that person perform on a weekly basis. Because when we apply our evolution of work model on the left, we look at 16 different types of AI technologies that will have a direct impact on the tasks of that workforce. So as you can see at the bottom of the page, when an organization wants to become a client, we pull the HR data, employee data from their HR system. We look at the job title, the workplace, the age, the salary, gender, and org unit, and map it to a job ontology. Once that mapping is done and validated by the client, the insights that are platform will produce are specific to your workforce. And then using the platform, you have access to your scenario planning tool that really helps you understand what can be the impact of your technology investment on your workforce, but also what are the opportunities that technology will provide us with in the future before we make that investment, and what does that mean for the workforce. So you can really have a proactive strategic workforce planning in place to really understand how the shape of your workforce will evolve over time, and what do you need to put in place in terms of learning and development investments, the workforce shape, all these different elements of workforce planning to really make informed decision on your workforce. Any questions so far? No.
Michael, just one particular question. I know obviously I've had a bit of experience with the platform. Can you just perhaps share with people, you talk about the 16 major emerging technologies. Can you talk a little bit about them and kind of what they might be, examples of them, so that people kind of got an insight into how that shapes the platform and the output?
Yeah, so you got the one that everyone is familiar with, your robotic process automation. So all the bots that you see when you type something and ask questions, that's a type of robotic process automation that is highly utilized at the moment, all the way to navigation robotics, so driverless vehicles, autonomous vehicles, and so on. So we only look at the technologies that are currently available, but also are in the R&D phase and will become prominent over the next 15 years. And for all those technology, we got a S-curve rate of adoption that is country and industry specific. So the way, as I mentioned, we're using it is lots of our clients got a current technology roadmap, so they know they're going to implement certain technologies depending on the industry and the priorities, and they want to understand, okay, what does that mean for the workforce? So they put those technology in the platform and really focus on this technology and understand, as we implement those technology across our organization, what does that mean for the workforce? What tasks are going to be automated? How many hours can be saved by automating those tasks? What is the capacity gain? Where can we reinvest those capacity gain back into the business? Is it into a customer-facing role? Is it a different part of the business? So it really gives you a view of how your investment in technology will help you become more cost-efficient, more performant, and also from the people that can be displaced or will be displaced by those technology, what are the potential career pathways for those people? So this is where the job corridor that you can see on top right comes to play, when we can pair and match and look at the different skills attributes between any two jobs within your organization, but also externally.
Just one more question, Michael. I know we've had some discussions because of one particular client need about the impact of climate change. Could you perhaps let the group know kind of where Faethm's thinking is in relation to that, and what impact it may have on the platform? Yeah,
so this is through a different offering. So typically that's the economic scenario module, and that product is mostly used by government and industry bodies when they want to really understand what are going to be the impact on the future workforce demand and supply of macro changes. So macro climate change is one of them. We can look at trade wars, we can look at energy transition. We look at different scenarios that the client wants to explore. And the way we look at it, we just will translate those impact into industry growth rate. And then we can really forecast what are going to be the impact of those changes into the workforce demand of a particular industry or a state or a country.
Thanks, Michael. Anyone else have any questions before Michael gives us a bit of an insight into the Australian labour market?
No. So the insights I'm going to share today are based on our economic scenario forecasting tool. And we look at the Australian base case scenario. So we looked at the historic growth of our industry in Australia and projected it 15 years forward. And as you can see, in every single state in Australia, the workforce demand is going to increase. And overall in Australia, in the next 15 years, there will be a workforce demand that was going to increase by 950,000 workers. So as you can see, in terms of economy, industries are going to grow, and the workforce are going to be more in need in the future. But the way we look at it is different ways. So we are now focusing on the New South Wales state, and we highlighted the top 4 industry that will be in demand of workforce in the future. So you can see that healthcare, professional services, retail and construction will be the top 4 industry in New South Wales that will be the most in demand of workforce. And on number 18, mining, very, very, very small amount of workers. And the unique way that we look at it, and that's why we're working a lot with government and industry bodies in Australia and across the world at the moment, is yes, some industries are going to be in demand of workforce, but automation is going to take out a lot of those jobs that will be created. As you can see, the gray numbers here is the technology impact. So how many jobs will be taken away from that demand? And then, the unique view that Faethm brings to the table is what is the net growth of those jobs. So when you decide to move an industry away from coal, as an example, how many real jobs are going to be created in renewable energy if we were to decide to invest in renewable energy? What is the net growth? Because yes, economy are going to be growing, but technology is going to take out a lot of those jobs away. And what you can see in the purple here is what are the jobs that will be added to implement and maintain those technologies that we're investing in. So a lot of new roles that currently exist or don't exist will be added to the workforce. And those roles will need to be ready and prepared for, because if you don't have the right skills to help you with your technology implementation and development, your digital transformation is going to fail. And this is something that we can showcase in the next slide. These are the top 9 jobs that will be the most in demand by 2036. So they're all these jobs in IT that you will need to help implement and maintain those technology that we're investing in. And the only problem with those jobs, so we know that they're going to grow, but as you can probably know within your organization currently, it's very difficult to attract those talent currently, and that issue is only going to grow as we progress through the years. And we did a bit of a forecasting. So we predict by 2030 there will be an undersupply of 330,000 ICT workers in Australia alone. So the only way to get those people into your workforce, it's really start identifying the people that will be displaced by your technology investments. What are the pathways from the role that would be needed in the future, and what kind of curriculum and content can we provide them to facilitate that transition into those roles? So an example on that slide is, the demand of drillers and miners will be in decline, and the demand of software and application programmers are going to be in the rise. And the way we can use the job corridor is what does that transition look like for the miners? Is that possible? How many years? What are the gaps? What do they need to learn to transition into those roles? And finally, before I pass it on to David and talk about strategic workforce planning, this is, we've got a module called the Future Capabilities module. When we look at 32 attributes that professional we need to upskill to remain relevant in the current role. So going forward, we will still need accountant, engineers, so on, maybe less of them due to technology. But for those people, we highlighted 32 core attributes that they will need to upskill to remain relevant in their current role. So we look at the human attributes such as leadership, critical thinking, collaboration, ethics, and so on, but also the digital and data literacy that you need in a digitized world. And from there, we can highlight for any organization where are the largest gaps or all the gaps to really have a targeted L&D strategy to upskill the workforce for the future capabilities that they will need. And as you can see on that slide, different industry will need different needs, different capabilities. So that's why the need of really the data on your own people to really understand where the gaps are in your organization.
Thanks, Michael. Does anyone have any specific questions in relation to just kind of understanding the platform, how it works, or just some of Michael's observations in terms of the future of work and the Australian labour market? Okay, well, we haven't got any discussion. Any questions?
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, I've got a question. Chantal here. Hi, thanks for that. Really interesting. I'm just wondering about the reskilling angle. So we're looking at obviously roles that will be redundant soon and looking to reskill them in the digital space. But has any work been done yet as to how to even go about that? Because they do seem like very different skill sets.
Yeah, so the way Faethm works, it's not, I'll just give you an example, and we will show our client the potential pathway, so it doesn't have to be a digital role. So it could be, I don't know, a process worker going into a supply chain manager, as an example. But what are the gaps? So, small steps, but because those guys can be automated by robotics into the manufacturing plant, but they can move into those roles because those jobs will be added to the workforce or won't be impacted by technology. So what can you offer that person to transition? And it's really case by case, because as David's going to talk about, Faethm is part of the solution, but then David works with our client to really understand what is the business strategy, if it's the growth, what's your retention rate, attrition rate, what's your retirement rate, and then when you take all this data into account, what is the future workforce demand and supply within your organization, and then you can understand who you need to reskill, to where, how is it possible using the job corridor, what are the gaps, what do we need to provide those people to transition. So yes, it could be IT roles of the future, but when we list all the job added to your workforce, it's not only digital roles. So we got change manager, we got project manager, agile coach, all these workers that will be needed to help you implement and maintain those technology investments. So lots of other roles will be added to your workforce, not just pure IT people. You get a lot of roles around it as well.
I've been hearing so much about the need for digital and just how many digital people are going to be needed in the future. So I'm starting to think about what roles could we start looking at to get ahead of the game in that space, because there is already such a war for talent for those roles, and I can only imagine what the future will look like.
Yeah, so all the 9 roles I shared with you are the ones that could be the most needed in Australia. So I will share the slides anyway, and you can see. Awesome. But the way we work with our clients is once we got the data and map it, we will tell them the job that will be added to the workforce.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
And then the way we work with Faethm is to then sit down with the client and start to map how you make the development programs for those cohorts of workers.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
It's an interesting project. And I'm sure Dave's going to cover some of that now when we talk about strategic workforce planning. So welcome, Dave.
Thanks very much, Damian. And there's a question in the chat from Benny around how much granular details available on upskilling and reskilling. I think the short answer is that each of the jobs in our ontology is a collection of 244 attributes, which are a collection of skills, knowledge, and tasks. And so what we can do as part of what Michael was talking about with the career pathing approach that we have with our job corridor is we can show the gaps between various skills. So if you've got a role that you want to transition to another role, we can show you the gaps, whether they're small or large, and so you can look at that at that level. So really what I'm going to talk about today is workforce planning. Michael, if you could just quickly scroll through so all of the dot points come up onto that's it, thank you. Just to save a little bit of time. So what I do when I talk about workforce planning or strategic workforce planning, I just sort of set out a little bit of a myth busting approach here, just to sort of explain what it is and what it isn't, because I think there's a lot of people have been sort of given all kinds of different explanations as to what's included, and I think I'm not going to go through each of these individually, but I think the key thing for me really is the one in the middle there, the business problem. It really is a business challenge. It's not HR's problem to fix. But what happens is HR are at the center of the solution. So they will often facilitate this program of work. And it's exactly that. It's not a one-off project. It's an ongoing program of work that involves all of the business areas, all of the interested parties such as finance, IT, and so on. And it's a real in-depth review of the business strategy to consider. If you think about business strategy, you may well plan for your future growth for 3, 5, 10 years. And you'll think about plant, machinery, logistics, all the assets that you're going to need. Well, the workforce is another one of those. So, we need to consider how the workforce is going to change, what we're going to need in the future, and how we can make that happen. So what I'm going to do today in the next sort of 25 to 30 minutes is just really go through how workforce planning can work and how we advocate this, and just give you a few best practice principles, how I work with some clients, what we do, and then really just talk you through a 6-step process that we endorse with our clients, and we're working actively with them, and really just go through some best practice, go through a few tips and traps, and take it from there. Happy to take any questions as we go, either in the chat or on the call, or equally happy to take more questions at the end. I know Damian's allowed some time, so like I say, this is what it is, what it isn't. We're going to share the slides so you can look at that a little bit closely. What do we talk about when we mean workforce planning? Well, for me, it's 3 aspects. So the next slide goes through these 3 things. The first is, I'll just wait for Michael to push them through. Thank you. Is that the purpose, the business strategy. So this is, what is your business strategy? It should be at the center of the program. It really needs to be aligned with the business strategy. The second part is the process, which is what we're talking about today, and that needs to be consistent and robust so that it's consistent across the whole business. I talk about perspective being data driven. So what we're obviously, as a data organization, Faethm has a lot of really useful data points, but that isn't limited to Faethm's information. All organizations have a lot of data at their fingertips, and which is why HR are often the facilitators of the process, because they have the richest source of people data, workforce data. So if you have one without the other, or if you have any of these missing, if you have no data, you're likely to have a very prejudiced view of the world, because you're trying to work on opinion. If you don't have a good process, you're likely to just have a partial approach to workforce planning. And if you don't have a purpose, if you don't have a strategy, so you don't know where you're aiming, it's pretty pointless to try and work through this work. And so the next slide, we talk about what is strategic. Most organizations have 6 to 12 month planning, tactical planning, and then up to 3 years operational planning. I generally term strategic workforce planning as 36 months and onwards, but every organization is different depending on their business cycle, their budgeting cycle, and so on. So we start to think about some of the benefits that you can get from it. What we tend to do at Faethm, we want our clients to use our information, and we want them to use the modeling that we've worked on. So we help them understand and build a sustainable approach, and that means we don't do the work for them. We actually help them understand what the data means and how to build the workforce planning program from scratch. And I work with a lot of different clients from all different kinds of industries. And we either work with an existing process they have, or we actually start from scratch on a process for them. The cost savings the sustainable approach is really beneficial, because, as I said, it's an ongoing program. So this is not something you just do once and then put on the shelf. You continually evolve this process. So it's really useful to be able to have that muscle memory in the organization you work for. The cost savings, generally, you can consider that, recruitment, although we're all finding it hard to recruit right now, including us, recruitment expenses are considerable, and also redundancy, where you find that you've got roles that you no longer need and you need to remove them. By considering how they could be redeployed, there are considerable cost savings to be recognised, and are obviously fed into any ROI calculations that are needed to help get this business case off the ground. we like to advocate to plan in advance. I mean, this sounds like a no-brainer, if you will, but it really is important to think about what are you going to need in the next 3 to 5 years, and how are you going to do it, and having a really good, robust plan to do that. And I think that the whole point about building career paths, Michael touched on this in his part. This is a really interesting point, and this isn't any longer that we're seeing that this isn't just the domain of white collar workers. This is now starting to get into all the workforce across all of the different types of roles, from senior execs right down to the shop floor, where you can actually start to have conversations to say, look, you're doing this role right now, but in 5 years' time, this role possibly won't be around. And so we need to help you think about what is going to be next for you. And for a lot of people, a lot of workers, particularly in blue collar industries, this is the first time they'll have had that conversation. So it's quite an interesting time to think about how these career paths could be used to help retain people. And of course, there are people that would be retained anyway, but I think it's really interesting to understand the concept of how that career pathing could influence the workforce and the culture that pervades throughout it. And one of the things that we always like to think that we can contribute to is to leave no one behind. So trying to future-proof every kind of worker in every kind of industry to give them something that will enable them to continue working throughout their working lives. So some principles that we always apply when working through this process, as I mentioned earlier, people should be considered as assets, just like anything else that you have in your business strategy. And they are a considerable cost that need to be acknowledged, that we need to nurture that. Acknowledging the risks, this can be seen sometimes as a negative, but the way I see it is, if you understand and accept the risks that are associated with your planning process and not being able to have the right number of people at the right time, you can find ways of mitigating, whether that's through delaying technology implementation or actually accelerating it, for example. There are many ways of being able to do that. I think the biggest point that I will make in the whole of this presentation all day is the opportunity to consult and engage with business. I'm 16 years in HR, and I know for years and years, HR are always talking about having a seat at the table. For me, this is the big chance. This is the chance to engage with the business, understand their pain points and understand what their planning issues are, and actually being able to do something pragmatic to help solve for those problems. And I think it cannot be done without the business involvement. So I think this consultation or engagement or collaboration, whatever your preferred terminology is, it is absolutely the number one thing. The one underneath there, that take the time. This is, I think, when I talk to most people about workforce planning, they immediately think of supply and demand analysis. So supply being the workforce you have now versus demand being the workforce you'd like, or your customers are telling you you're going to need in the future. And they're very quick to get into that analysis. And I think really my counsel would be to take as long as you can to actually understand the business strategy, understand from the leaders, the business leaders, what are their plans, what are their strategies, what are the plans for technology, how much budget do you have, all of those good things that will really need to be explored before you start crunching the numbers, because that's the time when you really start to bring it all together. Constant communication, sharing of priorities with stakeholders is absolutely essential. It's a big part of the collaboration piece we talked about. I think you commit to prioritizing workforce planning over other things. It can quite easily get lost in lots of other targeting exercises and other business priorities. But I think the more you share, the more you explain to people what you're working on, the more chance you have of embedding this on an ongoing basis. And it is just that, it's a continuous iterative process that continues to evolve as you move through your working cycle. So as you may choose, once you've put a plan in place for your workforce or an element of your workforce, you'll probably review that plan every 3 or 6 months to make sure the assumptions you made are still accurate and relevant. So we've developed a 6-step approach to workforce planning. We've worked on this for the last sort of 18 months, and we've got clients actively using this at the moment. The mobilize step is actually where we bring a lot of client information into our ecosystem. So we align it to the ontology that Michael explained earlier. And then the organization will build a team that enables them to work on workforce planning. And we help them understand what are those roles they really need. The environmental scan is the collaboration piece that I talked about. It's really getting underneath the business challenges, getting underneath the business strategy. I generally would advocate that you start with a pilot. So you find an area of the business who is willing to work with you. That's always someone who is an advocate of this process, someone who is or has got a significant issue that they need to solve. So, for example, when I was at Transport for New South Wales, I set up a strategic workforce planning program there, and we chose 3 critical roles that we needed to focus on. And one of those was project engineers. And as you can imagine, you need engineers for building bridges, building railways, building roads, and the actual process of bringing all of those business leaders together to talk about these challenges was quite illuminating, because they didn't know each other they were competing for each other's workforce, and yet they were. And so we had a good, robust conversation, understood some of the pain points, and were able to involve them in the solution of the potential solutions that we came up with. So the environmental scan is absolutely critical, and that before you get into supply and demand analysis and gap analysis, and this is where you start to see what you've currently got versus what you will need. And you need to include things like the growth targets and other aspects of your strategy. Strategic development, this is the part that most people have heard of, which is, we call the 6 Bs, the build, buy, bounce, borrow, bot. And this is where you actually start to think about your strategy to which is the most appropriate strategy to address the issues that you have. So I'm just going to go through each of the steps pretty quickly, because I'm conscious we've only got a little bit of time, but I want to just sort of give you a little bit more feel for what they actually mean. So in the mobilize side of things, we're looking to structure the program. Supply the resources we have. As I mentioned, demand is driven by the customer's needs. And then you need to build the team and align this to existing planning. And what I would say is that in all organizations, there is always a plan. There's always some kind of strategic plan, and it's actually much easier to align your workforce planning to that plan than try and work against it or alongside it. It's much easier to get this adopted if you're part of the wider strategic planning process. There will always be objections. There will always be, ways of thinking that this isn't as important as other aspects, or there'll be an objection to doing the work. I'm going to cover a couple of those in a second. We'll come back to that. And then finally, compiling an action plan, which will help you actually show that you're delivering some of the areas that you're promising on. So, well, if we go into the first sort of practical session. Normally, if I'm running a workshop, we'll do this as more of a practical session, but for today, we'll literally just go through some of the aspects that you may wish to consider. So when you're structuring the program, which business units are likely to collaborate. So thinking about who is going to be a good partner for a pilot for this work. It could be linked to pain points. It could be, who is literally you've got a good relationship with, who has a really good, strong business strategy that is clearly articulated. Talking to your head of IT, where are you most likely to be implementing some tech? There's a range of different things that you can consider to find a partner for your pilot. And then just on the right hand side there, these are a few of the roles that you would normally consider pretty essential to a workforce planning program of work. Not necessarily full-time work. Obviously a program lead and program officer would work on this probably full-time, but the rest are all part-time and used on demand when you need them. So you will always need a program sponsor. Typically, it's the CHRO or the head of HR for an area who will make sure that the program has the airtime with the CEO and the board or the exec committee as required. And others like talent acquisition, talent management, obviously will have an input into your strategic direction once you decide what that might be. But as you can see there, business leaders, finance leaders, all have a role to play in this because they have a different influence on the strategy of the business. Then we talked about managing objections, which is the next slide. And again, I've just put a few objections there that may ring true to a few people on the call. You may have heard these sort of things before. But I think, it's a good exercise to go through before you set up this process, before you set up your workforce planning program, to actually have a good answer or a good understanding what kind of objections you're likely to get and how you're going to manage them. Why do we need it? It's HR's job. I've heard that so many times. But it's HR are trying to help the business to make sure they've got the workforce in place to deliver on their strategy. So it's not necessarily HR's job to deliver a business strategy, but it's certainly their job to help make sure the workforce is there. Which means, this is why it's generally a HR driven program, often seen as being more work for the team. But I'd like to say that, most areas do a lot of planning. And so, like I said, integrating into that existing planning framework is really helpful. It's just another HR project. Well, it's not a project. It's something that, you can consider to be ongoing. So that once the business start to see the value that you can deliver, you tend to sort of find that dissipates. We've already started planning too late. Well, that's great because there's a plan in place. You can start aligning what you're going to do to that plan. Obviously, finance are always involved with planning. Again, try and work alongside. It's all about collaboration, as I mentioned. And that the one about HR why do they need to be involved? Well, as I've said all the way through, you need the right people to deliver strategy. So that's why HR are involved at this stage. So that's the mobilize section, and that's sort of just a few tips just to help get started. And then we start to move into what we call the environmental scan, which is the going out, talking to the business, collaborating, consulting. And on the next slide, what I've done here is I've given an example of the type of action plan. If you can just scroll forward, Michael. Thank you. So, for example, here, the business intend to implement some robotics into all areas of the business that require repetitive manual work. Implementation for about 5 years, and there'll be roles at risk that we'll identify by the end of Q3. So what are the implications, for example? What are the at-risk roles? What are the roles likely to be impacted most? What additional roles are we going to need to implement this tech? We will need new digital roles, as you mentioned earlier, Chantal, I think. And what other business as usual roles are we going to need? So as your organization changes and you find that you're taking out more of the sort of more repetitive roles, jobs and roles will grow into something different, more meaningful work. What will that mean and what could that be? So again, action taken could be a workshop with stakeholders to understand the strategy, the growth drivers of the business strategy and the implications that they would mean for the workforce, what critical roles are needed to deliver success. I mentioned earlier about risk, and then also really important to think about other scenarios. So what else could you do? What else would have an impact on the workforce or this strategy? So if we just take a real example really of a case study that we've pulled together based on one of our demo clients, demo accounts. We talk about scenario planning, and I've done a very simplified example of scenario planning here just to illustrate what I'm talking about. So we take this global European bank, and we say, right, okay, we've got 3 objectives in our business strategy. I appreciate that's probably very, very simplified, but we'll go with it. And that's to increase the number of Gen Z customers. Sorry, my phone just ringing. Double the size of the home loans book and improve the value of the customer journey by guiding customers through their long-term financial plans. So each of those objectives will result in a growth driver. The strategy will increase the customer-facing workforce by 2%. The client-facing teams for objective number 2 is an increase of 4%. And then the third one has got a range between 1% and 5%. So the point here is that, although we might be putting some technology in place, the growth will also need to be factored into our supply and demand. And this is back to the point that I made earlier about when you're thinking about your supply and demand, make sure you have all the facts ready before you get to that point. The scenario plan that I'm talking about here, we're looking at the second one of those objectives. So, for example, we're looking to double the size of the home loans book. And if we just take a very simplified 2x2 scenario plan, this we know to need at least 2 critical roles for this home loans. Firstly, we've got to have people to sell the loan loans, which are the loan advisors, and then we need the support staff to be able to fulfill on those on the business. So obviously, if we don't have enough support staff, we don't have enough loan advisors, we need to consider revising the strategy completely because we don't have enough people to do the work. We could consider automation, further automation, or we can consider having partners who could help us with advice, so we could farm it out. If we have, plenty of advisors but not enough people to supply the support, we could consider, delaying the strategy, outsourcing, processing, and so on. The same if we have not enough people selling our product, but plenty of people to support it. We could consider how we're going to address that. And of course, if we've got plenty of people for either of those, we're all good to deliver. But the idea here is that we should consider these different scenarios, each for each area or each different strand of the strategy, so that we can then think about what this actually will mean for our supply and demand modelling. And really, just to really sort of illustrate this a little bit more, Michael, if you just press once more, I wanted to show. Thank you. So this is our case study, our global bank. We talk, some pretty key metrics there, what we were going to include in our supply and demand model. And we're saying that, automation could impact 61% of these 300 or 306 client service representatives. And my point here is, imagine if you just held that as a point without any context. So if you give that to an automation, that number to a business leader and said, well, 61% of this workforce, this particular area of our workforce, are going to be automated, they might take that to mean that you're going to take 180 people out of the workforce. Now, bear that in mind when we go into the next slide, which is all about supply and demand. And this is the point I was making about, making sure that you understand the business before you get into the supply and demand. Because when we start to think about supply and demand, we need to think about, as we said, the supply, but we need to also consider all those growth drivers that we just talked about for all the different business units. We consider the automation impact over a period of time. And you can see there in the top grid there, we've got from year 1 to year 10, it builds up to that 61.6 number that we talked about. And so we need to consider all of these aspects before we actually do the analysis. And in the next slide, you'll see what that means as far as the gap. So for this particular example that we're talking about, we knew we're going to take out something like 180 people, which is 61%. But those growth drivers, when they are applied to the workforce over a period of 10 years, actually show us that we have actually got a deficit. So what we've thought we might actually have to, we're taking people out, we're actually going to need to replace them and some, because of the growth that we've got, the planned growth that we have. And again, this is a simplified example of supply and demand model, but the idea is that we need to consider all aspects. And of course, all aspects include things like attrition rates, retirement rates, and so on. So just moving through the final couple of slides that I wanted to talk about really is, this is the one that most people have heard of, the strategy development. I talked about it earlier, the 6 Bs. And what we do at Faethm is we've got various aspects which we can help with. We're not the answer to everything on workforce planning, but we've got some good stuff that we can share. So obviously where the automation is an appropriate solution to a workforce challenge, we can help organizations understand where technology is likely to make the most impact on their business. Build, for me, is the most important one of all of these Bs, and this is about redeployment. This is about looking at the surplus that you have in your organization and how you can possibly move those surplus into areas where you have a deficit. And this is where we talk about, career pathing, giving people options on how to move through your organization. And I think the point to make here is that it isn't necessarily a linear relationship. Just because they're doing that job now and you want them to do something else in 5 years doesn't mean they have to go straight to that. You might be able to move them around into 2 or 3 roles en route to that end goal, if you wish. But of course, we have, like I said, we have the reverse job corridor, so you can start to say, okay, what are the most appropriate roles that we could transition into these roles we know we're going to need, so the digital type roles that you talked about earlier. Borrow is an interesting concept. Most people relate to this as contractors or short-term workers. I've put an example there from McKinsey, who have got a concept called flow to work, which is where you have sort of smaller tiger teams that you move around your organization, things like change management and project management. Buy is, of course, recruitment. And you know, if you're planning 5 years out, you can start to consider how you're going to fill those gaps that you're going to need. And it might need quite a considerable amount of planning and searching for the right people that you're going to want to bring into your organization. Bounce is the more unsavory part of this work, and this is where people really don't fit your long-term vision, but you can actually do this in a humane way, and again you can start to help them understand where they could be relevant in other areas of industry, in other companies. And bind, for those of us who are in HR, we sort of think about bind as being more about our employee value proposition. So this is about purpose. Why does a person want to work for us as an organization? Why are they here, other than money, of course? But this is about, you know, purpose around, you know, identifying with the values. This is where the career pathing can help, you know, strengthen your value proposition to them, because they can start to see that you're actually helping them move through the workforce and move into a more value add role. And again, you know, our Faethm job corridor helps with that. And the piece in the middle there, the skills, this is something that we're working on at the moment, where we're looking to identify what are the skills of the future. We're doing a lot of work on job ads, where we pull a lot of the information out of the job ads, analyze it so that we can identify the skills that people are looking for right now. We'll continue to build that, but also we're working on a process where we work with our clients to help them evaluate what the skills are they have now, so that they can then figure out how to bridge that gap. And then the final slide, really, or the final piece of this, is the implementation. Like I said, there's 3 aspects to a gap. There'll be roles with a deficit, roles with an oversupply, or roles requiring no action. And this is where the strategies can be applied to those individual roles or skills. But the key thing here is to measure as you go, and make sure that everything you do is measurable, so that you can actually decide whether you're making a difference. So I'll just leave you with 3 things to sort of take away. Do you know your business strategy? Do you know where you could find out what it is, and who might work with you? Who is the most likely person that could work with you to set up a good program of a project, or sorry, not a project, a pilot? And what are the data points you might need? You know, including skills. So what kind of things have you got to hand, and what else do you need? So I've rattled through that pretty quickly. I'm sorry if I've spoken very quickly, but I'm very happy to go through anything again, or answer any questions from the floor.
Thanks, Dave. For that was really interesting. If I might start off, got a couple of questions, so I might kick the show off. One of the points you made early on was about, I guess, the perennial HR problem in terms of having their seat at the table. How do you, as an aspiring HR leader, how do you get that on that leader? How do you see it as being able to get that on the leadership agenda that, you know, you see it as important, but how do you make the organisation understand the importance of strategic workforce planning?
I think the key thing there, Damian, is actually to align with the business strategy. I think if you can talk business strategy with business leaders, and therefore highlight the importance of the workforce on that strategy, I think that then enables you to have those conversations, because it's you know, you could argue how are you going to improve or increase your productivity or improve the number of products that you build, without plant or machinery or premises to do so. And the same thing applies with people. You also always need the workforce to actually deliver that. And I think actually connecting those things up is a really, really important part. And I think once we start to talk about that in those terms, we're on a level playing field with the business leaders. And I think we're talking a similar language.
You talked about, I guess, a line to that particular point, the use of a pilot. And you gave, I think, a couple of examples of how you might try to find a sponsor. Kind of, what's your experience in terms of how successful that's been?
I think two or three things. I think firstly, understanding some pain points. So every business has a pain point, has a problem, has a challenge, and it's actually trying to understand that really, really well. I think including everyone in your initial environmental scan is important as well. So, for example, we work with a company, and we've been working with them for the last sort of 18 months. And they are an international wine and spirits manufacturer, and they had a plan to implement technology, but they were going to do it piecemeal across the organisation. And we included the head of IT in the initial conversations that we were having. And as soon as he realised that, you know, this was an opportunity to sort of bring everything together and actually have a solid plan, and actually had someone listening to what his plans were, and the potential to help him with two problems. First of all, understand the impact that he's going to have on implementing some of this tech, but secondly, being able to provide some of the digital skills that he would need in 3 or 4 or 5 years' time. We found we were pushing on an open door because this person was actively engaged because they could see the value that this kind of work could give. And I think that's the point, is actually trying to understand where people are struggling, or where there is going to be an issue if nothing is done. And it isn't an easy conversation, but it is one that is often worthwhile. And like I said, that generally speaking, with all our clients we've worked with, we've always found at least 1 or 2 of the business areas that will take a leap of faith with this process. And the interesting thing there, of course, in a lot of organizations, is as soon as one person has taken that leap, and you can demonstrate there's some value in the process, and demonstrate there's some good outcomes that can be achieved, then you don't have to do any more selling. It kind of sells itself.
Just on that, what's your typical entry point into organisations? Where do you like to pitch to?
Well, look, you know, we're slightly different. You know, we don't actually sell this as a process on its own. But look, you know, Michael and I work very closely together. I work both with Michael as like the pre-sales element. So we talk about, you know, we talk to companies about how they can use Faethm in their workforce planning, or how they can set this up. So it really varies from client to client. Some clients of ours have started and then stalled. And I'll give you an example. We work with IKEA in Europe, and you know they bought Faethm data. They were really going at it big bang. They were trying to go across the whole organization, and they were really getting stuck because they just had so much. There was just too much for them. So we actually changed their approach by saying, just focus on one area of your business that is really important. They have a new concept in Sweden where they are moving away from their warehouse style, and they're focusing on specialist stores. So they'll specialize in kitchens or lounge areas and so on. And so that's a big deal for them. So we said, right, okay, what are the roles that you're going to need for that specific business unit or business area, and let's just focus on one of those. And once we started looking at that, they were able to iron out a lot of the problems that they had in their process. So that was one example. Whereas again, another example was we would work very closely with IT. I think every organization is different, so one size really doesn't fit every single organization. Everyone on this call, I guess, will have a different challenge, but I think the key to it is actually finding out where the initial problem or if is any kind of little problem that could be addressed with some of this information.
Okay. Another question. You talked about the job corridor, and I guess in our work, we come across redeployment situations regularly. How effective do you find organisations are typically at redeploying?
Well, that's a tough one. That's early days, I think. I think this is something that's fairly new. I think to be brutally honest, it's only really started in the last 18 months to 2 years. It's very in its infancy. A lot of organizations are still working through that and what it will mean. I have got a reference point from years ago when I worked in a bank in England, and we just started doing it as a bit of an informal thing, and we started to measure. And it really did work, but that was in a very different environment. That was white collar banking. It was a much easier environment to do this. I think what we're looking at now is that everyone has got this opportunity to be redeployed, and so I think there are different challenges. You know, like I said about particularly in blue collar areas where, if you're starting to talk to someone about redeployment, this is not a conversation they may have ever had in their career, in their job. And so, and somebody raised this earlier today with me. You know, what if they reject that? And this has to be from both sides. You've got to, your workers actually have to want to be redeployed for it to be successful. So I think there's a real change management piece that's really critical to making it work. But I think it's too early days for me to give you any really good example. I mean, the examples we've got in the clients we're working with, they've just started. So it's going to, over the next 6 months, we will start to see some really positive examples, and I'm hoping I'll have a few more examples for you.
I think something, because I would agree, redeployment typically in Australian organisations is not handled particularly well. Even though we've got legislative requirements for it to actually happen, it doesn't. Most organisations don't execute redeployment particularly well. But there's something that you talked about in your 6Bs, and that was the buy-in. And just going back to your point there about, in a blue collar scenario, it's a scenario I'm very familiar with. You're right in that most blue collar employees have never had that career kind of conversation. Their job was just to start on the floor and stay on the floor type thing. And it's probably only a relatively small number in the past that have moved beyond that. But I think if organisations embrace that idea of the employee value proposition and have those conversations with more of the employee population, then there is a greater scope to offer redeployment and for the employee experience to have the confidence, I guess, to know that the company will invest in them, they'll develop them, so that that scenario of the future of work and everything's going to be automated, what does that mean to me? I can actually see that there is a path. Somebody's shared with me the conversation and the pathway for allowing me to participate in that future. And I think that's an aspect of workforce planning today that is, poorly handled by many organisations.
I totally agree. I think this is what I refer to sometimes as a change management challenge, because you've actually got to think about this is so new. And I think the narrative that's coming through is the robots are coming, they're going to take your jobs, right? And like I said at the start, I actually don't believe that. I think actually the robots are already here. They've been here for a long time and they've been doing this stuff. It's just accelerating now. But what we're seeing is that the jobs are changing, right? And I think the companies that will be successful are the ones that manage that message and that manage that whole process of, just because you're doing this now doesn't mean you're always going to be doing that. And I think, I'm being quite blunt about it, but I think you can actually deliver a really powerful message, and it's a positive thing, right? It's not a negative. It's a really positive thing that if your organization wants to invest in your career, but it's got to be delivered in the right way. I think you're absolutely right. It's the organizations that do it well are the ones that communicate that well. And of course, you know, like I said, you know, business leaders and employees are similar. They will follow what others do. So this is why you get a good pilot, you get a good area of the business where you can prove this works, and you can then point to that and show that as a case study to say, look, we implemented tech in these areas, and this is how the workforce were impacted over a period of time. And then that has a really, you know, people will take more notice of that because they can actually feel it. There's a question from Benny there. How do we use job ontology to determine future role fit? So I think it's probably a job corridor type question, isn't it, Michael? Do you want to take that one?
So we got a score for the job fit. So the highest the job fit, the easiest the transition is going to be. And what we take into consideration for the job fit score is the skills proximity between the two jobs, the rate of automation, because you don't want to transition someone into a highly automatable job, and also the salary, because you want to have the same type of salary when you transition, or higher if you can. But that's what takes into consideration when we come back with a job fit.
Wonderful. I'd love to learn more about that. Thank you.
Any other questions for Dave or Michael?
Is anyone on the call actually doing any of this work? Is anyone involved in this?
I mean, I'm just at the beginning, very infancy stage of this, and I'm really doing a lot of work and research into the future of work and what roles will be needed. And it is a really tricky one. It's a huge amount of work. It's a huge project. And the question I was going to ask in chat, but I'll just ask out loud, is how overt should we be with our employees about the need behind this change, or the purpose for upskilling them or reskilling them for roles of the future?
I guess that's a tricky one. I guess it's linked to culture, isn't it? What is your culture like as an organization, I would suggest? Because if you've got a culture where you share and you're very clear with your strategy, and you're very open about that, and you know, your workforce are used to that, I think be as overt as possible. I think if you're in a workforce that is probably highly unionized, for example, where you might have it might have a negative impact if it isn't positioned well. I think you've really got to consider how much you share at what time. I'm an advocate. I'd rather know what's going on, and then I can manage how it works. But that not everybody thinks like that, and I think you have to be sensitive to the workforce. I know when we were at Transport for New South Wales, when we were looking at some of the workforce, the consultation with like the enterprise agreement and other aspects of that were always front of mind. So there was always a certain amount of stuff that was not allowed to be sort of shared as openly as you would like. But I think if you're in a private enterprise and you've got a pretty forward-thinking workforce and you're used to sharing things, I think you should. I think because, and the other thing as well was when you start to share information and thoughts around how the work could change, that's where you might find where people actually put their hands up for some of this stuff, right? And you start to see people who you've never really considered for career paths, transitions, or different roles actually do start to show themselves. And I think one of the things that we're working on at the moment is trying to understand how we evaluate the skills that we have in our workforce. I haven't got the answers, so I can't share anything on that at the moment, but we're working very closely on it, because I truly believe there are obviously the skills that someone does in a job, and they're in their job description and you know what they are. There are skills that someone has that you have no idea that they have, and they're really sort of hidden. I used an example earlier in a conversation around mothers, people or caregivers, people who take time off to look after their children. There's a whole range of skills that you learn when you're doing that role, and I know I've done it myself, that are really, really valuable in the workforce, but they're not necessarily on somebody's CV, right? And then there are the really hidden skills that people have had for years that they've never really used. since they maybe even left college. So there's a whole range of things that we need to try and get underneath to start to try and see how they could be engaged to help us fill some of these gaps that we're going to have. And we're seeing a negative migration in the last 12 months. I think it came out this morning. So, we're going to have to start thinking about some of these things pretty quickly, because as a workforce, we're going to have to sort of figure out, we're not just going to be able to buy in the talent that we want. And I think, we mentioned earlier that this is a challenge already that you mentioned, I think, Chantal, earlier, buying some of this digital capability is really difficult. Whereas if you've got people who have got the capability to learn these kind of things, if you can find those people in your organization, then you can start to work on that. And that's what I was meaning when I talked about being able to plan for the future. You haven't got to do it by next week or next year. You've got 3 or 4 years to sort of put these kind of programs in place that will enable you to be ready when you need them.
Yeah, great. I think the message we have is we're always telling our people to, look at your skills, look at the skills of other roles, see where you can go in the future, think about your career. And we really do encourage moving around, career mobility and all of that, but it's almost directionless without knowing where we should be kind of nudging them to, or tying it to the strategy to say, in 3 to 5 years, we want to be here and we need these types of roles. So why don't you have a think about going here based on your skills? I think you'd be good for it. So, I know it relies on good systems. It relies on a lot of things, and that's probably part of the problem that we have. But yeah, it's good to, it's really good. That's really helpful for me to guide my thinking.
I think it's the consistency of process that's important as well. I think, having everybody doing the same thing. We talk about this robust process, having a consistent approach. And one of the ways of scaling this kind of work is to do it through the business partnering network that you have. Most business partners know their business really well. And if they've got an approach that they can use, albeit they may need to tailor it for different areas of the business, but they can then actually have those conversations and start building that kind of conversation and dialogue. And that will actually help you then think about how these career paths could work for you as an organization. And I know it's helpful to have all the systems and the tools to do that, but I think the conversations are as important in the early days than having a system to do it.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
A couple of comments I would make is that I know Jonas, who's listening on this call, we as a group have had this conversation around the future of work and what it means. And I think for many organisations, it is a nebulous kind of concept that, we understand, the future of work, but translating that into what it actually means to a worker today, I think is a really difficult concept to get in place. And I just see that the Faethm platform, and I assume there are others, but the Faethm platform is one way of demystifying that and allowing you to have that, build that culture and have that transparency so that you can have those conversations with your employees. And instead of, DIY personal development within an organisation, the organisation's got a clear picture of where it's headed, not in 12 months' time, but it's that 3 to 5 year plan and beyond that Dave talked about earlier.
Yep.
If people can see that, when they join an organisation, that they're not just going to remain an operator on the floor or whatever it may be, that there is a chance to build a career within an organisation, and this is what it might look like because these are the roles that the organisation is going to need in the future. That's a far more valuable and exciting conversation to be having with your people.
Absolutely, and this is the point about it being a part of the EVP. There's been a lot of talk in the last sort of year or 2 years about purpose, people wanting purpose, and I actually really came across this when I worked for the government. In the government or any public sector, you find that there's a real sense of purpose in the workforce. People work there because they have something other than money that they want to. They're giving something back to society, and I think that there is a growing emphasis on purpose, particularly with a lot of the younger generations coming through now. My daughter's Gen Z, and she talks to me about when she goes to work, she wants to actually feel that she's valued. She wants to know she's got a reason to be there other than just being paid, and I think it's really, really important, and it's going to become more important. And you're absolutely right, Damian. When you've got an organisation that's saying to you, hey, you know, how can we work together to actually build something that's going to give us financial security? Because at the end of the day, the company's got to make money, right? You've got to deliver your business strategy to keep being an employer. And so, you know, once you start having those kind of conversations with employees, they actually become stakeholders if they aren't already.
Yeah.
And it's a really engaging conversation that sits really well, I think, with a lot of people. And again, for the first time in their lives, a lot of people are having these conversations for the first time. You know, it's the way things are changing. And I think that's probably
if more of those conversations actually occurred, we may not have the great resignation that
exactly, yeah. That's exactly right. You know, and I think if nothing else, it's a chance to actually stop some of that movement.
Yeah. Anyone else have any further questions?
Oh, Dave, just a question. There's two questions I've got. One is, you gave a couple of examples of global examples of where you've worked with, but I'm curious, in Australia, are there particular industries that you're working with more than perhaps others at this point in time? So that's my first question. My second one is, I'd imagine through all the discovery that you do when you work with an organisation, particularly in identifying new roles and the skills and capabilities for those, does Faethm then have another element to the organisation of where you can also help develop either learning solutions or at least provide the input for learning solutions to be developed? Because not a lot of organisations have big L&D departments these days. And it could be a bit of a snag with all the great work that's done if that piece can't be followed up on.
No, absolutely. It's a great couple of questions, Kim. I think the first question, we see most organisations that are doing this are in financial services. I think this has traditionally been a white collar approach. I think that's got to be called out. But as Michael said earlier on, we're seeing a much bigger increase in companies like mining organisations, utilities, pretty much anywhere where there's a lot of technology being implemented now. Obviously, they're the conversations we usually have because of being a technology organisation ourselves. So I think that, but we're seeing, we're seeing it go across all of the industries that we work in, that everyone's starting to have these conversations, but it is early days. I think as far as learning is concerned, I mean, Michael mentioned this earlier, and he might want to touch on this again in a second, but, we were acquired in September by Pearson. And Pearson are a global learning education company, and so you guess why they bought Faethm, because obviously what we would like to do in future is that when we talk about a career pathing or a build strategy, we're going to say, look, if you want to go from here to here, these are the steps you would probably want to take. Oh, and by the way, our parent company has some learning, and I think what we'll do is, as we get more mature with that, we'll offer that. But I think that this is a growth area as well, Michael.
Yeah, and also Kim, through the future capabilities module, when we show the gaps in the future capabilities, we have mapped 30 AWS courses to the digital literacies and the gaps. So we can provide that off-platform offering. If you're already working with a learning and development or learning content company, we can map some of their content to the gaps. So that's something that we can do off-platform currently. And the point of Pearson is we will be able to do it on platform, so plug any content from any provider in the world when we identify a gap, either for reskilling or upskilling. But currently off-platform, we can do that if you're already working with a provider, or if you want to work with a different provider, we can do that off-platform. And back to the client. So I'm working a lot with government at the moment on the energy transition around the world, everywhere, and a lot of healthcare companies are coming, and a lot of companies are coming to talk to us more from a skill shortage point of view and productivity gain. So healthcare companies, lack of nurses, tell me which technology will be able to automate some of the tasks, and then nurses can focus on patient care. So if we were to automate 15% of their mundane tasks, how many more patients can they attend to? Can we open another hospital? Can we have do we have enough nurses to open that hospital? So it's back to the growth objective of that company. We want to build another hospital. But do we have enough nurses? No. Which technology can automate some of the tasks because then I got enough nurses to open the hospital. So a lot of companies come to us to understand what is the capacity gain from our technology investments, and then what can those people impacted by those automation augmentation do in the future. What type of role can we create for these people? What type of task are they going to do? Is it going to be more customer focused, or is it going to be different type of tasks that is enabling the business to go to the next phase?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you both.
Okay, well, I'm conscious of the time, so in wrapping up, I'd like to thank Michael and Dave for their great sharing of information and insights that they've provided today. I think everyone, in terms of contributions, the discussion's been really good and interesting, and I'd like to thank you all for coming along, and we look forward to seeing you at our next disruption event in April, where we've got, I think, Virgin as our special guest. So there's certainly an organisation that's been disrupted and changed in recent times.
Yeah.
So you're most welcome to attend that event. So thank you, everyone. We will be sharing the video recording of the event, and also I'll do some notes of the event. But in particular, thanks again to Michael and Dave for their wonderful insights today and for making the time available to share their knowledge. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.